Walking Without Skin, Managing Adversity with Vulnerability.
Pain is wrong, every inch of my heart like an open wound. I can't go on, I'll drown if I don't stop the bleeding soon.
Firstly, men still are not being brought up and haven't been brought up to be able to have conversations. They often don't have the capability or inbuilt skills to be able to share their feelings and their emotions. Then layered on top of that, they don't have the vocabulary, right? So they don't have the skill set, but then they don't have the vocab to be able to talk about this stuff. And then thirdly, they don't have the spaces. I think we need to recalibrate masculinity so that we understand what it truly means to us and how that masculinity recalibrated can actually make a difference to the world around us.
Where can I find some protection to prevent this ongoing infection? I'm walking without skin. Walking without skin.
You are listening to Walking Without Skin, the show where we encourage our guests to be vulnerable, to share their voices with authenticity, to tell their stories from the heart. We will talk about hope and recovery, about overcoming loss, changes, challenges, and adversities. We will walk without skin.
How will I know when it's safer? When every step feels like sandpaper. I'm walking without skin. I'm walking without skin.
And here is your host, Lois Wagner.
Hi, I am Lois, your friend for forgiveness and the creator of Walking Without Skin. I have a book with the same title, Walking Without Skin. And today I have a fascinating guest, Gavin Moffat. Hi, Gavin.
Hi, Lois. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too.
I'm going to read this little input about Gavin. Gavin has soared through the clouds over the Makgadikgadi Pans of Botswana in his microlight and descended below the arch of the blue hole in the Red Sea of Dahab in Egypt. He has been a speaker and a panelist at TEDx. He has released an electronic and experimental album called It's Not About the Title. And he's the author of Swimming with Sharks, Simple Business Guidelines for a Complex World. He is the co-founder of Join.the.dots and diversity and inclusion organization Hers&His, through which he helps business leaders and organizations find clarity, cultivate human connection, resulting in increased collaboration, innovation, productivity, and happiness.
I feel like I don't do enough, so I'll take your word for it that I do a lot. I think I still have more time to fit stuff in.
Well, before we get into your work and what you do, please can you tell me what the phrase walking without skin means to you?
So I think for me, everyone has a layer of skin or layers of skin, and the onion analogy is the one that always comes through the best. We all have layers of skin that we add to ourselves, mostly from a protective perspective. So we put things around ourselves in order to protect our inner selves, and then we decide how much we're going to reveal or not reveal. And walking without skin fits in with our goal of cultivating connection among human beings. Basically, we're trying to get people to deal with each other on an honest, open, authentic way. And you can't do that if you're hiding too much below all your outer layers of skin.
I love that. Thank you. So what do you do? I mean, we said a lot in that introduction. So give us a brief overview of what you do and also what led you to do this work.
So the simplest explanation of what I do is I cultivate connection. It's that simple. My job is to try and get human beings to deal with each other in a way that is open, honest, and authentic on all levels. That's both from a corporate perspective and that's in a personal perspective. So I'll give you the two examples to illustrate that. On a personal perspective, one of the things that I do is I run a Hers&His men's connection group, which happens twice a month, every Thursday, every second and fourth Thursday, from 7 o'clock to 8:30. And what I do is I offer men a free space to come and talk, to listen, to be heard, to be seen. And there are no requirements for being there. You arrive, you contribute as you can, you are seen and heard as you can. I do that because I think men don't have the space to do that. There aren't enough spaces for men to be able to be heard for the challenges that men are facing. So that's kind of like on a personal perspective. From a business point of view, we go into organizations and we help them deal with the challenges that they have. Their challenges may show up as racism, or they may show up as harassment, or they may show up as disenfranchisement. But all of those generally come down to lack of communication between people. And that's where the cultivating connection part comes in. In order for you to be able to deal with me, we need to have certain things in place. And some of those things are, for example, being able to trust one another. If we're unable to trust one another on a most basic level, how are we ever going to be able to deal with each other in a way that creates innovation, collaboration, productivity, and job satisfaction? So cultivating connection underlies everything that I do, and that's across all the spheres. And then everything is just layered on top of that. And a lot of it I do for fun, and a lot of it I do because I feel a sense of responsibility to try and break the cycle that exists in our world and try and end that cycle with me, if at all possible.
Well, I'm sure you're doing a great job. You're out there doing so much, and I'm sure you're having an impact on the world. Gavin, I'd like to explore a little bit more about your men's group. What are some of the stories, or what are some of the issues that are revealed in these conversations?
That's actually one of the things that blows my mind, is that there are generally a limited number of issues or challenges that men face that are common across all men, exactly the same as if you go into women's groups or if you go into all gender groups. There are a limited number of issues that are common and the same. And those issues stem from a limited number of things that have happened to people in their lives. So, for example, in general, people have either been loved too much, they have been loved too little, they have been abused, or they have had no touch, or et cetera, et cetera. There's about 7 of those things. And those things then generate responses later in their lives that show up, for example, as being selfish or being narcissistic, or being trustworthy or untrustworthy. So those things in general all come from a base. So to go back to your specific question, the kind of things that I see in men's connection groups, and actually in all the men's work I do, is that firstly, men still are not being brought up and haven't been brought up to be able to have conversations. They often don't have the capability or inbuilt skills to be able to share their feelings and their emotions. Then layered on top of that, they don't have the vocabulary, right? So they don't have the skill set, but then they don't have the vocab to be able to talk about this stuff. And then thirdly, they don't have the spaces. And by spaces, I mean, where does a man go to have this kind of conversation? What does he do it around the braai? Not a chance. Most men will not talk about these things that are really important to them and make themselves vulnerable at a braai, because there will always be, a couple of men who will talk down or make fun of you being vulnerable and open. So the issues that men have are the issues that I think people understand, but that they don't necessarily take seriously enough. We don't have the skills to be able to talk. We don't have the language to be able to have those conversations with, and we don't have the spaces. So that's the one side. The other side is, what are the genuine challenges men face? Well, men feel responsible for everything. Why? Because the world has told us we're responsible for everything. We're responsible for earning, the salary. That's what we're supposed to do. We're responsible for looking after the families. That's what we're told we're supposed to do. We're responsible for keeping people safe, etc., etc. So men face all of these challenges, and the assumption is that men are okay with that, but actually men struggle with these things. Men want to be able to talk about these things often, and they don't have the space or the ability to do that.
Well, we're grateful that you've started a space for some men, but yes, we certainly need to spread that much wider. I want to ask you a question. What do you think of the Me Too movement?
I think that there is tremendous validity in women being able to share their lived experience in the way that it has been shared, so that more people can understand that this is not just a rare occurrence. Women being abused, whether it is verbal or whether it is physical, it's not the lone wolf out there that is doing this. This is regular. This has been happening for a long time. And so Me Too was a good way to start that revolution. I think the challenge is, because we're in the age that we're in, it kickstarts something, but it doesn't continue it. The other challenge we have is when somebody is picked on, whether it's validly or not, that picked on person tends to become defensive. They close down and they don't become part of the solution, they become part of the problem. I think for me, that's where the Me Too movement, moving into in our trash, did do what it could have done. So I'm a supporter of Me Too. I want women to be able to share and feel their lived experience, and for men to be able to hear women's lived experience, because I think many men still do not understand what women go through on a daily basis.
The Me Too movement has also maybe gone a little bit too far, in that men now are too afraid to even look at a woman or touch a woman or hug a woman, because he may be accused of harassment. What do you think to that?
I think that your point is valid, and I can share anecdotes with you, for example, of friends of ours who have children who are teenagers, boys, who those boys are afraid to even have conversations with young girls for exactly that reason. They feel that they will be outed, they will be whatever comes with those social situations. So it's 100% valid. And what that has resulted in is a cancel culture where men are very unlikely to speak up, because they know that if you speak up in any way defending something that has to do with men and how men feel, you will be canceled online, social media wise. And so why bother? It's just too hard. It just doesn't feel like it's worth it. And so Men Are Trash is part of that cancel culture that for me hasn't moved forward what we want to move forward. We want to be in a situation where in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, we're not even having a conversation about gender equality, because there is gender equality and equity. I'd like to be out of a job, Lewis. I'd like to be able to go, let's shut down Hers and His. That's the end of that, because gender equality is not even a conversation. The challenge is when you call people out, you tend to make them defensive, and they tend to not be part of the solution. When we call people in, which is what we do with Cultivating Connection and with our men's groups, when we call people in, we're curious about where they come from. We're engaging with them because I'm trying to do some of this stuff through subterfuge. And I'm not, everybody knows it's through subterfuge, but I'm trying to wheedle my way into men's psyche and men's minds to say, have you thought about this? How about thinking about it this way? What happens when this happens? Have you asked somebody a question? Because doing that is way better than pointing fingers at somebody. Pointing fingers results in nothing positive.
Gavin, what is your opinion on these marches and all the activity that goes around gender-based violence?
Lois, I think that it's all critical. I think that it is important from two perspectives. I think the first perspective is from the side of the people who are organizing the marches, who are organizing the events, who are doing the activism. I think it's very important that they have a platform and the ability to express themselves and to get their thoughts and feelings out there and to try and make a difference. I think that that is critical, because otherwise they're going to live life feeling as though they are not heard, as though the things that they are trying to talk about are unimportant and that they're not making a difference. So I think the organizers, it's really critical. I think for me, though, the impact is less than it should be. I think the number of people that are actually impacted that make any kind of substantial long-term change from these activism events is very small. However, having said that, if one person in 100 changes, it's better than no people in 100 changes. I think, though, that the challenge and the change and the impact is shallow. And I think we need impact that is far deeper and impact that lasts for longer. And the challenge we have with that is, if we want that kind of impact, that impact has to be systemic. It has to be made inside the systems, not on the surface of the system. So when Me Too happened and I was part of Mankind Project, standing on street corners all across South Africa in solidarity with the movement, while it worked for us and our ability to stand up, how many people were really changed with what happened? And the reason is it's systemic. That kind of gender inequality or that kind of patriarchy or misogyny is systemic. And those systemic changes happen in a couple of, the changes happen in a couple of ways. One of them is through religious institutions. I think that religious institutions have a big part to play in breaking patriarchy. I think corporates have a big part to play in breaking patriarchy, and then society as a whole. And I don't see those as silos, but I silo them because it's much easier to understand them as separate things. Obviously, there are people that are part of each of those and all of those. But I think that it's important to focus on those three as being big parts to changing.
How can we do this? What must we do to get this throughout the world, to make it a worldwide action? Your groups are great, but it's not enough.
Agree with you. And at the same time, I can't think that way. So firstly, my concern is about how do I scale my impact? And I can only scale my impact by getting other men involved. So I want to have Hers and His men's connection groups across the world. We're in the process of talking to somebody in Canada who will probably start up one of those for us sometime in the next month or two. I want these things to be scaled. I want to be having 20 to 30 of these men's groups for free being run by men every single week. That takes time and it takes effort. And actually, it takes money. So we have to put in the time, effort, and money to start that. That is a slow process, and it doesn't scale as quickly as we would want it to. And I can't afford to look at this as a global problem that I personally have to tackle. I wouldn't get up in the morning. I wouldn't get out of bed if I had to think about what I have to do to solve the world's problems. I can't do that. What can I do, though, Lois? I can tackle my thing, which is here. Now, here might be 1 million people, or 5 million people, or 10 million people, but I can't look at 7 billion people. So I'm going to tackle my thing. I'm going to hope that what I do creates sufficient impetus for other people to get involved and do their thing. And if we have 100,000 men focusing on their thing of 1, 2, 3, 4 million people, that's when we drive global change. We can't solve this problem overnight. You have to remember that many societies across the world, not all, many societies are still based on a patriarchal system. And there is no actual benefit for them to move from that patriarchal system. So I can't get involved with trying to make those changes for those societies. I can make an impact where I can make an impact and then encourage people around me to have an impact wherever they can have an impact.
Reach one, teach one. We finally get the word spread.
And I think that there's a lot of us doing that. So what we tend to think is that we're this lone little light bulb in the middle of nowhere trying to create light for the rest of the world. But We're not. There are lots of people doing these kinds of things. And like many NGOs or NPOs, we should be trying to find those people to get together and to multiply our effects. And from our perspective, what we're doing is we're setting up men's connection groups as something that can be created almost as a franchise space where I can train people to do this stuff. We're not doing processing in these sessions. In other sessions, we do processing. About processing, what I mean is I am not trying to ask a man questions to move him through a space in his life from A to B to C so that he comes out with a profound new awareness. That's not what we're trying to do in men's connection sessions. In men's connection sessions, we're trying to let men touch a part of themselves that they don't normally touch, talk about things that they don't normally talk about, and walk away from these sessions going, I see value. I can see myself as being a better human by doing these things. So I want to teach other men, teach the teacher, and set these up as franchise sessions so that people around the world can literally copy and paste what we've got as a model and start using it. And obviously, we need to make sure that it's done in a way that is safe, that people who are facilitating these sessions, because they are facilitated, are qualified, sufficiently qualified to be able to do that. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but for me, I'm not looking at the elephant. You know, the old adage of one bite of the elephant at a time. I don't look at the elephant. As I say, if I do, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Instead, I look at the hind quarter and I'm taking a little bite there and I'll start there.
So it's said that abuse and domestic violence and the like is a man's problem. Do you agree with that statement?
No, it's society's problem as a whole. A man may be a perpetrator of that, and for that reason, the man is responsible for that perpetration. But many situations, let me give you a statistic. Of those that live in a household that has domestic violence, 36% will be likely to commit domestic violence themselves or be perpetrators of GBV in their lifetime. Let's just say that again. Of the people who live in a household where they experience domestic violence or GBV, 36% of them will commit it. That is not solely the man's problem. And remember that men are not the only recipients. Men are not the only perpetrators of GBV. GBV is also perpetrated by women. We just have far fewer statistics. Another statistic that goes with that is that 31% of people who live in a household where GBV is perpetrated are likely to grow up to choose a violent partner. So that person who has been through that is more likely to choose an environment where they will experience that in future. Now, for me, that's really messed up. So how do we go back to the root of all of this? You referenced it earlier, Lois. How do we go back to the root and start getting to the symptoms before they become symptoms? And that's really getting to the man-child, the boy-child at an early age to help teaching a set of values that are not the values that society is going to try and foist on him at a later time. So let me just wrap around to the question again. Society as a whole has a sense of responsibility that it needs to take for GBVH, so gender-based violence and harassment. Society has a responsibility, at the very least, because society is not taking responsibility. Society is not stepping up and doing what they need to do. They're not taking note when it happens. They're not reporting it when it happens. They're not providing sufficient support when it happens. And they're not encouraging those people that are perpetrators or the recipients of to help themselves in a way that they should really help themselves. And I think patriarchy, misogyny, sexism are three things that if you support or turn a blind eye to, you're in fact a continued supporter of GBV, because there is a correlation, not necessarily causation, between those three and GBV.
What is society going to do about this? What should we be doing to help generate these changes?
So I think you'd have to ask society that question, because I can't speak on behalf of society. What I can tell you is how I want to be involved. And what I want to do is I want to help recalibrate masculinity, because I think one of the biggest challenges that we actually face is the fact that masculinity in and of itself is currently a measure of things that are irrelevant in today's society. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we are measured against things that are irrelevant. So, how strong am I? How focused am I on getting the job done? How independent am I? How sexually active am I? All of these things are what society says we need to measure ourselves against. And all you need to do is have a look at the cover of men's magazines or beer adverts or alcohol adverts for men, and you can see that's what society says we need to be. And what I'm saying is, I think we need to recalibrate masculinity so that we understand what it truly means to us and how that masculinity recalibrated can actually make a difference to the world around us. And so, I mean, what I've done is I've come up with what are my personal list of things that I think are what masculinity is and should mean. And it's part of a talk that I do called Recalibrating Masculinity. And I talk about that because I think it's really important that we look at what masculinity was and the fact that it may have been relevant at some stage and the fact that it isn't any longer.
That brings me to my project, which is called Be Brave, which is aimed at creating a better masculine persona. It's about eradicating bullying and harassment. So I've come up with Brave, that men need to be, and boys as well as girls and women need to be brave. And I have an acronym around that. But in terms of doing that, what does the word brave mean to you?
I think that it is a word that has lost its genuine meaning over time because it's used in so many different contexts. I think it is also contextual. So, brave could just mean me standing up in a meeting, not literally, figuratively, and saying, I think that that joke that you just shared is actually quite sexist. And have you thought about the impact of that joke upon a woman if there's no women in the room? That could be brave all on its own. It seems like a small thing, but if those are your work colleagues, okay, and those people are going to be looking at you tomorrow and the day after, that is brave. Brave is something I did 4 years ago, I think it was, walking through a shopping center in Durban when I encountered a 27, 28-year-old man abusing his girlfriend. And I saw this thing happening, and I walked past not going to intervene, and then decided to intervene. The outcome doesn't really matter because, unfortunately, in most circumstances of household abuse, the abused partner very seldom does anything against the abuser for a whole bunch of psychological reasons, which we don't need to go on now. For me, that was brave. Saying to a man like that, excuse me, what is, in fact, I didn't speak to him first, I spoke to her first, and saying, are you okay? Is there any way I can help you? That is brave. Almost anything that you do that is outside of your comfort zone could be called brave, really. Brave isn't going and fighting a battle, although that is brave. You know, brave isn't going and doing an Ironman, although believe me, that is brave. Brave is those small things that we do every single day that are out of the ordinary for us. That would be my take on brave.
Thank you for that, because it's exactly where I am with the BRAVE acronym. The B stands for two things: boundaries, know what your boundaries are, and know the boundaries of your partner and your people around you, and then respecting those boundaries. And then it also stands for bystander. Don't be a bystander. So you need to be brave to do what you did, to go and intervene. And we know that people can't always intervene because it's dangerous, but you can call somebody, you can do something.
Sure.
There's lots of things you can do. And yes, it takes bravery to do that.
Sorry, Lois, I think what people don't think about is that it's not only dangerous for you, potentially it's dangerous for the partner. The partner that is being abused, it could be dangerous for them because often the perpetrator will take out their anger at having been shown up on that partner. So there are so many reasons that are valid for not intervening that people use. But, on certain occasions, it's not something that you can just walk past.
Many years ago now, one morning in Cape Town, painted on the streets in big red letters was something to the effect of, "I saw what happened last night. I'm sorry I didn't help." And there was red roses strewn across the road. And I always wonder, what did that person see? What happened that night? And that man who saw that and did nothing, or that person, that woman, whoever it was, is walking around today with that guilt of not having done something. So,
Sure.
as you say, you can't always intervene, but you can phone somebody, you can call somebody, you can disturb. There's things you can do. And yeah, you need to be brave to do that. So what tips can you give to our men out there to recalibrate their masculinity?
So one of the things that I do is I basically have three things that I'm trying to do. And the first one is to recalibrate masculinity according to what my masculinity looks like. And I'll give you some easy examples. So for me, one of my things is I want to be curious and open-minded. And everyone goes, yeah, of course I'm curious and open-minded. Well, no, you're not, because actually we're built to be judgmental. Judgmental is the opposite of curious and open-minded. And we are really built to be judgmental. So I want to be curious and open-minded. And what does that look like? That looks like me listening to somebody and being able to hold two thoughts in my brain at the same time where those are opposing views. That's not as easy as it sounds, because my judgment comes in and I immediately go, oh, that person's an idiot, or they don't believe. I mean, a brilliant one that's happening right now is vaccination and anti-vaccination. And that is something that's being weighed up. And we need to be able to be curious and open-minded. Curious and open-minded, however, does not mean that I have to agree with you. It just means that I can hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. I want to respect others and their perspectives. Okay, so after I've been curious and open-minded, a person who's anti-vaccination has views. I want to be able to respect those views and their perspectives, and I don't have to change my mind, and I don't have to agree with you, because this idea that we have to agree with each other in order to coexist, this is a load of rubbish. In what world have people agreed with each other all the time in order for coexistence? Not true. And then kind of like a third example, and then 9 of them, so I won't go through all of them, is to have healthy boundaries and manage them. And you spoke about that as part of your Brave. For me, boundaries are critical. Boundaries are one of the things that help you define your safe space, your idea of truth, your idea of trust. And those boundaries can only be defined by you, what they are. They shouldn't be defined in response to what somebody else's boundaries are. Although somebody else's boundaries can help inform your boundaries and help you make a decision of what those are. I think then from there, so that's kind of the first part, recalibrating masculinity. I think the second part that I talk about, which is really important, is that men need to give themselves permission to talk. Men don't have conversations that are deep and meaningful, in my judgment, that I see in the spaces that I've been in. So we need to be able to give ourselves permission to talk, and other people need to give us permission to talk as well. And then the third part is that I think we need to create the spaces to be able to have these conversations. So I talked about the Men's Connection group. That's a space. A space could be a physical space, it's a virtual space, whatever it is. It's a space for you to be able to come on a regular basis, have these conversations, and when you don't need them anymore, move on. And I think those are the three things that for me are key. Re-look at yourself and what it is that you measure yourself against for being a good human, and I'll talk about that as well. Then have a look at how you can give yourself permission to be able to do these things, because if you've been programmed not to share, then you need to say it's okay to share. And then the third one is to create these spaces. One of the things that I discovered when doing the work around what I wanted my masculinity to be was the 9 things that I came up with are actually as relevant for the feminine as they are for the masculine. So they're actually things that are a definition of what a human being, humankind should be, not just mankind. So for me, though, I'm focusing what I'm talking on I'm focusing on men specifically, and so I reference men as part of that, the masculinity as opposed to the feminine.
And another word for the B of brave is balance, getting that balance between the masculine and the feminine as well.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that that's another part. The yin and the yang conversation is also something that men don't have. Men don't intrinsically get brought up understanding that you are not one thing. You are many things. Our life is nuanced. Our personalities are nuanced. We're not black and white. There is this incongruity with all these supposed fixed ideas. So 100%.
If you could have a billboard with anything written on it, what would you put on it?
Two things. So I'd have to pick between them. The first would be work in progress. And then the second one would be still processing. In fact, one of the things I've just had done is a batch of t-shirts made for us, which have got work in progress across the front, because there is this ongoing thing that says we are supposed to be perfect. We are supposed to be right. We are supposed to know everything. We can't have no answers. And I think that that's a load of rubbish. We're all a work in progress. I will be a work in progress until I die. And every time I'm around my children, who are now older, I can see that I'm a work in progress, because things crop up where I go, "Ooh, that was my parents. I don't want to do that. I'm a work in progress. I'd like to stop doing that. How do I do that?" Not that my parents were bad people. That's not what I'm saying. It's just I want to stop some of those generational things that I don't think have value anymore. So work in progress, still processing, and it would be a toss-up. I can't decide on which.
Well, I think you have to have both, and maybe a couple of 100 meters apart.
That would be great. Thank you. If you could arrange that, that would be awesome.
So we've spoken a lot about the his. What about the hers?
What about the hers? I think the hers is critical in what I do every single day. In fact, I almost have been on my journey for the hers part as opposed to the his part. So a company that I co-founded with Ingrid Lotzer, my wife and business partner, is called Hers&His. And the hers is first, obviously, because we live in a world where we think it's probably time that women came first before men did, as part of trying to create that gender equality. So much of what I do has an end result of wanting to change the lives of girls and women while not being focused on them. It's an interesting thing to think about. So I work with men, yes, because I want men to be able to fulfill their greatest expectations in their life and to be the best that they can be. For what end goal? Well, so that they can cultivate better connections with the women around them. So I think ultimately the hers part is probably more important as an end result for me than the his part.
I wish there were more men like you around.
I wish there were too. It would make life a lot easier to fill up my men's connection sessions.
Gavin, we could talk forever. I just love listening to you and your insights. You're fascinating and you're inspiring. And unfortunately, we can't speak forever. So how can people contact you, especially the men who want to join these groups?
So the easiest thing to do is to go to facebook.com/hers&his now, all written out, hers&his now. And all of the events that we have are on there. The men's connection sessions are on there. We share information about the work that we do and what's happening in the environment around us. So that's probably the easiest place for people to get that info.
Guys, do go and join Gavin. I think he's doing amazing work and we definitely need more of you to join. And I invite all of you to contact me at walkingwithoutskin.com. You can get a free coaching conversation to discuss your journey, your healing, your direction. And I invite all our listeners out there to fly free.
Thank you for listening to Walking Without Skin. We would love your feedback, opinions, suggestions, and ratings. Please share this podcast far and wide to encourage more people to share their stories with vulnerability and authenticity.
I wanna live. I want